All right, let's discuss converting units and converting in a way that will always work. Yes, you can figure out if you have 8 dozen eggs, how many eggs that is by multiplying it by 12. But when you get into more complex conversions, for example, miles per hour to meters per second, it becomes a little bit more complex and it becomes much easier to make a mistake. The process I'm going to show you is a little bit longer, a little bit more involved, but it is foolproof. If you follow these steps, you will not make a mistake. And I want you to at least demonstrate that you are capable of working your way through this. And then if you feel like you can do it on your own from then on, that's fine. But I want you to at least try this and work through it. As with any video, it's in a video format. I'm going to go through things once, but I encourage you to pause, take notes, try examples on your own, and then see if you're right afterwards. Rewind if it doesn't quite make sense. Rewind if you just want to see it again and analyze why it's happening and analyze why it's working. So use the fact that this is a video to your benefit. I'm going to go through it once, and then it's on you to make sure that you know what you're doing. All right, so converting units breaks down into 4 super easy steps. I call it the MAME system. You absolutely don't need to memorize this because it will become intuitive. But while you're first trying it, it might be easier to use this acronym. So let's go through it. What are the 4 steps? M, mark where you start and where you want to end as fractions, making sure that you include units. When I say as fractions, if we look at example 1, we have 8 miles. That alone is not a fraction, but any number in the world can be expressed as a fraction, even decimals. So instead of 8 miles, you would write 8 miles divided by 1. Now we have a fraction. So now I've marked where I started, and I need to mark where we end. In this first example, we're going from 8 miles to inches. That's what we want to convert it to. So over here on the right side, I'm going to try to get my answer in inches. So I want to go from miles to inches. And now I need to arrow my path. I don't know how many inches are equal to 1 mile, but I do know that I can go from miles to feet, because 5,280 feet is equal to 1 mile. So while you're arrowing your path, you need to come up with these conversions. I know that I can go from miles to feet, because I know how many miles are equal to how many feet, and I know how to go from feet to inches, because I know how many feet is equal to how many inches. 12 inches equals 1 foot, 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. So now let's actually apply this. Let's insert our conversions. Now, we're going to multiply this by our first conversion. Our first conversion is going to be going from miles to feet. And let's look at how many feet equals how many miles. So then you might be thinking about what you put in the numerator and what you put in the denominator. I want miles to cancel out, and I want to be left with feet. So if I want miles to cancel out, I'm going to put it in the denominator, because you have mile on top and bottom, which means they're going to cancel each other out. So miles in the denominator, which means feet, has to be in the numerator. And then you fill in the blank. How many feet equals how many miles, and that's where this conversion factor comes into play. Oh, feet, 5,280 feet, and miles goes with 1 mile. That's it. And the reason you can do this is because you're technically multiplying it by 1. 5,200 feet equals 1 mile. So 5,280 feet divided by 1 mile is 1. I hope that makes sense. So now we're going to multiply it by another thing that's equal to 1. Now we have our answer in feet, but we don't want feet. We want inches. So now we need a conversion that goes from feet to inches. And how many feet are equal to how many inches? 12 inches equals 1 foot. Easy. But what do we put in the denominator and what do we put in the numerator? Since feet is in the numerator, we're going to want it in the denominator so it'll cancel out. So we're going to go from feet to inches. So now feet's going to cancel out and we're going to be left with inches. That's the only unit that hasn't been canceled, and it just so happens to be, not just so happens to be, we've designed it that way, but that is the answer we want to get to. So that's our last conversion factor. We're good, but we still have to fill in our values. How many feet? 1 foot. How many inches? 12 inches. Easy. So now our fourth step, multiply and divide. You can do this 2 ways. The first way is multiply all of your numerators, and 8 times 5,280 times 12 is going to give us 506,880 inches. Divided by 1 times 1 times 1 is 1, and miles cancel out and feet cancel out, so we don't have any units on the bottom. So inches carries over, and then we have an answer of 506,880 inches. Done. Now, before you just move on to the next problem, you should always think about whether or not your answer makes sense. If we have 8 miles, and we want to know how many inches that is, I don't know how many inches it is, but I know it's going to be an absurdly large number. That makes sense. I think there's a ton of inches in 8 miles. So I'm cool with that answer. Now I can move on. It makes sense to me. Let's try a second one. So now we're going to solve problem number 2. We're going to convert 1 year to seconds. And we're going to follow the exact same steps as we go. So step number 1, mark where you start and where you end as fractions. We're starting with 1 year, and we're going to convert it to seconds. So we need to go from years to seconds. I don't know how many seconds are in a year, but I know that I can go from years to days, and then days to hours, and then hours to seconds if you can do it, or if not, hours, minutes, seconds. So let's go years to days, and I know how many hours are in a day, and I know how many seconds are in an hour. So I've arrowed my path. Now I'm going to insert my conversions. Let's figure out what those conversions are here first. How many years equals how many days? 1 year equals 365 days. All right, so which one goes in the denominator? So to figure out what's in the denominator, it has to cancel out with what you already have. So we need to cancel out years, and then we're going to go from years to days. And then you fill in your blanks. How many years? 1 year. How many days? 365 days. Good. By the way, if you think you know what you're doing, and I should have said this before I started the problem, I encourage you to pause the video and see if you can figure this out on your own. Welcome back. Let's see if you got it right. So now we're going to go from days to hours. I know 1 day equals 24 hours, right? Which one goes in the denominator? It would have to be days because we're going to try to cancel out days. So days to hours. 1 day equals 24 hours. So now we've canceled out days. And now we need to go from hours to seconds. Unfortunately, I've done this long enough. I know 1 hour equals 3,600 seconds. You could have gone from 1 hour to 60 minutes to 1 minute equals 60 seconds, which would just be one more step, and really no harder of a problem. It's all the same. So 1 hour has to go in the denominator, so we can cancel hours, and that's equal to 3,600 seconds. And now we have 1 times 365 times 24 times 3,600 times seconds. So your unit is correct. We have achieved what we wanted to achieve. That's the only unit remaining. So now let's do the math. Holy smokes, that's a big number. And I'm going to round it after the third important number. So instead of 31,536,000, I'm just going to round it to 31,500,000, which is close enough. And we'll talk about significant figures and 3 significant figures in class, and when you round and when you don't round. But if you want to carry the numbers through the entire problem, absolutely do it. I have nothing against using extra units. So 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times no units is 1. So now we have an answer, 31,500,000 seconds equals 1 year. 31,536,000 seconds. Isn't that a song? Might be. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've heard it, but I think that's how the song goes. And we know that we got the right answer because of the song and because 1 year is going to be a ton of seconds. So 1 year is exactly equal to 31,536,000 seconds. So those first two were kind of, hopefully at this point, straightforward. But now we're going to get to something a little bit more complex. Those numbers only had 1 unit that we were working with. But what about when you're already working with fractions? Instead of 1 year, 88 miles per hour. And we're going to convert it, instead of just to inches or meters, to meters per second. So now we have numerator and denominator numbers we need to work with. But the steps are still exactly the same, except you might have to do them for the numerator and also for the denominator. So let's follow our steps and hopefully guide us through that. If you want to try this on your own, you can, but it might be good to try this one or follow along and then see if you want to try it on your own the second time. So we're going to follow the same steps. We're going to mark where we start and where we end as fractions. We're starting with 88 miles per hour. And notice how I put it over 1. You don't have to do that, but that's what per hour means. If you're driving 88 miles per hour, that means you're doing 88 miles every hour that you are driving, walking, running. I know that's really fast to walk, but you get the idea. So we've marked where we started, and now we need to mark where we're trying to get to. Meters per second. In fact, I should shift that down a little bit so we don't run out of room. 88 miles per 1 hour, and we're going to meters per second. The steps are going to be the same, except now that we have a fraction, we need to arrow our top path and then also arrow our bottom path. So we're just going to do things twice. So our units, we're starting with our miles and hours. The first step we need to do is go from miles to meters. Oh, I forgot to put that. Oh no, we did go from miles to kilometers. I do have that conversion factor up there. By the way, you don't have to memorize any conversion factors because any one you need to know will be on your equation sheet. So I know that I can go from miles to kilometers. And I know how many meters are in a kilometer, because kilo means 1,000. We'll discuss that in class. So we can go from miles to kilometers and then from kilometers to meters. We have our top path. And now let's try the bottom path. Hours to seconds. Oh, we learned in the second problem how to go directly from hours to seconds. 1 hour equals 3,600 seconds. So we have our bottom path. Now, do one path and then do the other path. So do this to this to this, and then you can work on canceling out your denominators. So let's ignore the bottom of it entirely until we finished our top path. So we want to cancel out miles, which means miles has to go in the denominator. And we're going from miles to kilometers. How many miles equals how many kilometers? 1 mile equals 1.504 kilometers. Okay? So now we've canceled out miles. By the way, I recommend always canceling out your units. That way you know which units you've canceled already and which ones you haven't. It's a great way to prevent yourself from making silly mistakes along the way. So now, kilometers. Ooh. Oh, that's meter. I erased part of it that made it look like inches, but it's still meters. Okay. So, I'm sorry about that. How many meters equals how many kilometers? Well, 1 meter equals, no. 1 kilometer is a lot of meters. So 1 kilometer equals 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters equals 1,000 meters. Okay, so what has to go in the denominator? We want to cancel out kilometers, so we're going to put that in the denominator. Kilometer, we're turning that into meters and fill in our gaps. How many meters? 1,000. How many kilometers? 1. So now in the numerator we have meters. Success! We're halfway there. But now we need to convert our bottom. So now you can ignore all of this stuff and just worry about converting hours to seconds. Well, I know hours are in the denominator here, so to cancel them out, they would have to be in the numerator. So hour has to be in the numerator, so it'll cancel out, and we're going to go from hours to seconds. How many hours equals how many seconds? 1 hour equals 3,600 seconds. Easy. So now we fill in our gaps. 1 hour, 3,600 seconds. And now multiply and divide. So let's multiply our numerators. We have 88 times 1.504 times 1,000. And when you multiply those, you're going to get 132,352. And what unit wasn't canceled out? Oh, meters. We never canceled meters out, which is what we want. And then in the denominator, we have 1 times 1 times 1 times 3,600 seconds. So, 3,600 seconds. We're left with meters per second. That's a great success. And now let's divide our numbers. 132,352 divided by 3,600 equals 36.8 meters per second. And that's it. I know that's a lot, but if you do 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 of them, it will seem simple after that. It'll seem trivial. Now, I promised you a second way to do this, or a second way to do the fourth step, the multiply and divide. And to do that, it's super simple. And by the way, you can do it either way, whichever way feels better for you, keep doing it. You take your first number, divide, multiply, divide, multiply, divide, multiply, divide. So what that looks like is 88 divided by 1, and obviously you can skip the 1s, but then multiply by 1.504, divide by 1, multiply by 1,000, divide by 1, multiply by 1, divide by 3,600. And this is sometimes called the zigzag method. Either way is fine, and you still get 36.8 meters per second. So it doesn't matter how you do the math, and once you have demonstrated to me that you can do this, you can do it whatever way you want. But I do need you to at least show that you're capable of doing it this way, so I feel like I have done a good enough job that I can set you loose with problems like this. And again, as with all videos, please feel free to go back, rewatch, rewind, pause and try them yourself. Use the video as videos are meant to be used. Thank you.